The Seattle Kraken season may be over, but for all intents and purposes, the front office job is really just getting started. Plus, Kansas City Mavericks sweep Tulsa. All that and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Erica L. Ayala, your host here from the very beginning. I'm also a contributor to CBS Sports, as well as, obviously, a host of Locked On Kraken, and I bring you the women's hockey spotlight on Locked On NHL every other Friday, along with Rachel and Gil. I want to let you know before we get going, we've got a pretty jam-packed episode for you. That today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Okay, let's get into this. Some of you saw the video of my bonus content, my reactions to some of what Ron Francis said in his kind of quote unquote exit interview with media. And I thought some things were taken out of context. I posted a video, or at least I thought I did, posted the wrong link for our insiders, but the insiders, you got that earlier today. For everyone else, you can listen to my thoughts on the audio platform. So audio listeners, you also got that first. And then around the time that this episode goes live for viewers on YouTube, you'll also be able to watch the full comments from Ron Francis in his media availability, as well as my effective rant. Ron Francis said some things about defense that I just blatantly don't agree with. And so I kind of let it all loose in that bonus episode. So go check that out. But today you're going to hear from Ron Francis, and this is all about the next steps for the front office. And again, in that bonus episode, I alluded to this, but I do think that the Seattle Kraken, rightfully so, are going to lean into, we have a process. There's an evaluation process, whether that's for players, whether that's for coaches, or whether that's even for front office moves. My gut is telling me that the Seattle Kraken are really going to take their time. Unless they have some glaring issues that they have addressed, obviously defense is not one of them, but unless they have some glaring issues, I don't know that they make just kind of wholesale changes, at least not right away. You've got the playoffs going on, and we'll do a really brief update at the end of this episode of what's happening in the NHL. We're also going to talk about the ECHL playoffs today, and tomorrow, either tomorrow or Thursday, we should hear from Tad O'Hat again. Anyway, but what does the offseason look like for the Seattle Kraken? And I think Ron's answers, while they're truthful and somewhat informative, they're not, he's not really telling us anything that would be outside of, in my opinion, the process. But some other things that he did mention includes world championships. And he lists out some players from the Seattle Kraken that we can expect to see in world championships. But here's a little bit from Ron Francis, again, his media availability at the end of the 2023-24 Seattle Kraken season.
Players stopped playing, but on the management side and the scouting side, we still have a lot of stuff to do. The U18s start in Finland, so our people are going there for that. The World Championships start after that. The Combine, happens towards the end of or the early part of June. Then we have the draft. Then we have free agency. We have dev camps. There's a lot of things we're doing, but certainly at this point, there's guys that we have our eyes on, whether it's free agents or potential trades. And again, we're watching them, especially in the playoffs. How they play at this time of year is very important. So we look at a lot of those things for sure.
What makes you confident that you can find answers that, for whatever reason, the team wasn't able to find during the season?
Well, I think the thing is we've done it before, right? We did it after year one. we found some issues. We went out in the summertime and addressed the issues, and it changed in season 2. And that's our goal now. We have to, as a management team and a scouting staff, come together with the right ideas and try and get the things done, whether it's free agents, whether it's trades, to make this team more successful next year. And that's our plan, to have a big off season and try and address those issues. And that's what we go through in this 2.
So we're going to hear a little bit from Ron again, but I really like that last question. I believe it was from Glenn. And, Ron answering, what do we do in the offseason when we did it in season 1? And I guess for me, that's another part of the conversation that I feel I was having on the podcast earlier in the season, but is worth coming back to. I agree with Ron partially. I agree that this Seattle Kraken club did a decent amount after season 1 to get better. We talked about, personnel changes. They made a goaltending coaching change immediately. It was one of the first things they did after that first season. We also know, of course, they extended Jared McCann even before the offseason. So there were definitely some things. But for the most part, the core was kept in place. And that didn't happen, in my opinion. Of course, yes, I love Ryan Donato, but I think there were other pieces that, again, were kind of shaken up. The pieces that were the success, they were not replicated well from season 2 to season 3. And so I think that has to be a part of the process as well. Were we always going to get, the kind of output that we were getting from Donato, Geeky, and Daniel Sprong? Well, I mean, one way you can measure that is to see what teams are in the playoffs, right? And that's one way to measure it. Another way to measure it is, and more importantly, arguably, even if teams aren't making the playoffs, how are those guys fitting into other systems? And that's not to say that they belonged with the Seattle Kraken for the end of time. Sometimes you just are not a good personnel fit. And again, the price has to be right. So it's just tough when you put enough together in season 1 and or ahead of season 2 to have a playoff run, and then you get to the second round of the playoffs in 1 year, and then you miss the playoffs the very next season. And again, you can't talk about this Seattle Kraken season without talking about injuries. We all know that for sure. And it's not just the injuries that were the problem. If anything, for me, and I guess you could argue that consistency or injuries, it affects the consistency. But even if we take away the roster and lineup changes that were required because of injury, I don't know that individual players were able to play with consistency. And again, I don't want to say injuries are off the table and that we can't talk about it. It definitely impacts, even at the individual level, your consistency. And when we talk about Jared McCann or even Matty Beniers, we'll probably talk a little bit about that. Is this a failure of a season for those two given their numbers? And I think it'd be interesting for us to break that down and then hear from them and what they were saying. But, again, I don't want to take injuries off the table, and injuries aren't the only reason for the inconsistency for this Seattle Kraken team, because these are all able NHL caliber players, and they didn't always play like it. So we're definitely going to talk about that. I have a few more tidbits that I want you to hear from Ron Francis, and we will get into all that and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at Game Time. You know how much I love Game Time. I talk about it all the time. As a matter of fact, I was hanging out with some friends. There's a pretty well-known artist coming to Tulsa. You might have heard of him, Bad Bunny. And a good friend of mine who's actually from Puerto Rico wants to get tickets for that and wanted to find the best deal. I got to tell him all about Game Time. You can pick out specific events that you'd love to attend. You can find flash deals, zone deals, and of course, all the views from the seat in the tickets that are available. Last minute deals, you can save up to 60% by buying last minute for things like sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The toggling in this feature shows the total upfront cost, no surprise fees at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off, your first purchase. Terms apply. But again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Enjoy your next event. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Want to make sure you know that the Locked On NFL mock draft is available now. Find the ultimate 6-episode series on Locked On NFL Draft to hear who the local Locked On experts are picking for every NFL franchise, with live reactions from local college football experts and even the fantasy football angle. The Locked On NFL mock draft available now on Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube, wherever you get podcasts. All right. We're going to get back into Ron Francis because he said some interesting things regarding, again, what are some of the things the front office has to do, including player evaluation. So let's continue on with Ron Francis talking about what some of his players and by extension, as you heard earlier, what some of his staff is going to be doing this summer.
Assessment, right? Are there players that we need to move out to try and bring others in that we think can do a better job? Do we have people in our lineup? We still think we have a pretty solid core in our group, and but we're looking at everything we have to look at right now to make us better. So yeah, I mean, we've got there's two different groups, the UFAs and the RFAs, right? So probably the biggest on the RFAs would be Maddie and Tolvi, and we'll get conversations going real soon with them on their agents and trying to get something done there. Yamamoto's the other RFA with Arbright, so we have to make a decision whether we qualify him or not. Because if we qualify him, then he can take us to Arb. And then on the UFAs, some decisions on those guys. We had conversations in the exit meetings and kind of let them know kind of where we think we are now. But obviously some of that could change as we move forward and what we can and can't do with our lineup between now and the draft and as we head into the free agency period.
Ron, you mentioned the World Championships. Do you have a general idea of which of your guys are going off to play in those?
Yeah. So Belmar will play for Team France. Tatar will play for Team Slovakia. Grubauer will play for Team Germany. Burakovsky will play for Team Sweden. McCann, Tanev, and Alexiak will play for Team Canada. We probably had, in addition, 6 or 7 other guys that had the opportunity to go and whether being banged up or for other reasons chose not to. And then we have one other player that is still on somebody's list, but we'll know more probably in the next 2 years. So until I know that, I'd rather not say his name. But so we have seven players playing in it.
So again, there is more hockey to be played, thus more hockey to be evaluated. And no, I'm not just talking about international competitions because, of course, there's a little thing called the playoffs happening right now that unfortunately the Seattle Kraken missed out on. But I tell you who didn't miss out on it. It's the Kansas City Mavericks, who actually will continue on and make it to at least the second round of the playoffs after they got a 2-1 win over the Tulsa Oilers last night. We heard from Tad O'Had on yesterday's full episode that Jack LaFontaine was going to get the start, but that Cale Morris and Jack LaFontaine were pretty much kind of tag teaming this series. And a lot of that had to do with the Tulsa team having an overworked goalie. Sound familiar? Yeah, I think it does. But it was a good win for the Kansas City Mavericks, our ECHL affiliate. They actually dropped the first goal of the game, and so we're trailing coming from behind. But it really didn't take too long for the Mavericks to get on the board. That first goal for Tulsa came at the 18:10 mark in the first period. And then later on, a response goal, if ever, at 18:23, we see Bouchard got his first goal of the night. Cade Bouchard, rookie forward from Minnesota State Mankato. He got his first multi-goal postseason performance of his career. He had both goals for the Kansas City Mavericks. As I mentioned, the first one, a response goal at the 18:23 mark in the first period, and then at the 8:42 mark in the second period. No goalie assists, at least that's not what we're seeing on the on the game sheet here. Just another good game, though, for the Mavericks. And again, we should hear from Tato Had in the next day or two as this team gets ready to push on to the next round of the ECHL playoffs, the Kelly Cup playoffs. Now, they're going to have some time off. The series is going to be against the winner of Idaho and Allen playing right now. But their series started later. So the first game of this series in the Mountain Division finals, is slated for Saturday, May 4th. And it's going to be hosted, the first two games will be hosted by the Mavericks. And then game 3 through 5 is going to be headed to either Idaho or Allen is the Americans, I believe. So that's Tejas. So yeah, it's a good time to be within the pipeline of the Seattle Kraken. Now, how long is it going to take for that to reach the big leagues? Well, we still have some figuring out to do, but the future looks bright. We have the ECHL playoffs that are happening right now. And again, our Kansas City Mavericks are in there. Then we also have the AHL playoffs. And the Coachella Valley Firebirds have a bye through the first round. We're going to talk a little bit more about those playoffs on Friday for Firebirds Friday. But again, tomorrow or Thursday, we should have another interview. It'll likely be audio only with Tato Had, who's the general manager and head coach of your Kansas City Mavericks. Excuse me. Of your Kansas City Mavericks. A little technical issue there. Coming up next on Locked On Kraken, we're going to briefly go over what's happening in the NHL playoffs. I personally am not rooting for any NHL team other than the Seattle Kraken, so I'm just keeping you posted on what's happening. I know we do have some former Kraken members who will be playing in the postseason. But although we wish them well, of course, in all endeavors, I can't say that I'm rooting for their team. Either way, we'll talk about that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken are brought to you by our new friends over at Policygenius. Policygenius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. With Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million, dollars of coverage. So again, a plan that starts at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. But, if you need help comparing options from top companies with a team of licensed experts, Policygenius is the place to go. Your work life insurance policy may not offer enough protection for your family's needs, so why not get help from a place like PolicyLink to find what you need? Thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot from customers have found that this Policygenius platform is the best fit for their needs. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com/LockedOnNHL or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/LockedOnNHL. Today's episode also brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. We know that, of course, the NBA and NHL playoffs are chugging along, baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs and slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit fanduel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Erica L. Ayala here, your host of Locked On Kraken. And listen, there's a lot happening with the NHL playoffs. And so let's just go over what the matchups are looking like, because we really haven't talked about this at all, because, this is a Seattle Kraken podcast. So let's start over with the East. You've got Florida taking on Tampa Bay Lightning, the Boston Bruins taking on the Toronto Maple Leafs, the New York Rangers and the Capitals, which is always just kind of a fun exchange overall. Then you have the Hurricanes versus the New York Islanders. In the West, yes, the Vegas Golden Knights make the playoffs, and they're taking on, wouldn't you know, the Dallas Stars. And then you have the Winnipeg Jets taking on the Colorado Avalanche, the Vancouver Canucks versus friend of the podcast, and friend of the podcast's favorite team, the Nashville Predators. And then you have the Edmonton Oilers and the LA Kings in a divisional matchup and rivalry in the postseason. Right now, we have some games, as I happen to be recording, that are underway. So we have the Caps and the Rangers. The Rangers have the lead here as the game is dwindling down. They also lead the series 1-0. We're also tied 2 goals aside at the start of the third period. It looks like here between the Lightning and the Panthers. The Florida Panthers actually lead this series 1-0. You have coming up later tonight, at the time that I'm recording, these games haven't begun, but you have the Avalanche and the Jets, and the Winnipeg Jets actually took game 1 in that series. And then you also have Vancouver taking on the Predators. Vancouver up 1 game. So 4 games on tonight. There's another 3 on tomorrow, Wednesday. The Boston Bruins and the Toronto Maple Leafs, they're tied at a game apiece. They play tomorrow night, 7 Eastern time, 4 Pacific time. 6:30 Pacific time, 9:30 Eastern, the Golden Knights take on the Dallas Stars. We already talked about, all right, Golden Knights make the playoffs. Good for them. They lead the series 1-0. And then also Edmonton is going to take on the LA Kings. That's going to be at 7 Pacific tomorrow. And that's where the Kings are actually looking to even the series. Edmonton took game number 1. So really quick, don't want to get into it too much. Like I said, I'm not rooting for any particular team. If I absolutely had to pick, I would say the LA Kings. And that's really, truly only because if you're an everydayer or an OGer or you follow my women's hockey work, then you know. That's because of Blake Bolden. I'm always going to root for Blake Bolden. And, she has an affiliation with LA Kings these days. But you can also catch some of her work on ESPN, which I think is awesome. So that's really all I have for today's episode. Again, check out our YouTube page. We are so close to monetization, and some of it is because of watch hours. So we are going to be posting all those exit interviews for you. Take a look. I know so many people love hearing from Vince Dunn. We posted his first. Up next is Ron Francis. You can hear his full comments. Really interesting disclosures, especially given injuries, where he talks about Vince Dunn and a neck injury. And we'll talk about that when we talk specifically about Vince Dunn. Actually, we're going to do that later this week. He talks about Eberle and a hand injury. So even outside of what was reported, and of course, every team is going to say this at the end of the season and for a lot of different reasons. I don't think they change some of what went well this year for the Kraken. If anything, sometimes given what he told us in media availability, it might heighten or illuminate some of the hard work that some of the guys were putting in. Also some of their struggles, to be honest. But in the same way, I don't think it hinders any of the bright spots. I don't think it excuses some of the low points in the season. And that's ultimately how I feel about this Seattle Kraken season. I can account for things here and there, but there was also a lack of, if we're just being honest, effort, maybe belief, confidence. Again, we're going to hear it said a few different ways in the exit interviews, but it left us wanting more. And in my opinion, knowing that more was available and possible. And that's what stinks. So we'll see how it all shakes out, but we'll be following it, of course, here on Locked On Kraken. Again, Erica L. Ayala. You can also follow me at Erica_L_Ayala. That's where you will find a lot of my musings from my CBS sports perspective. If you want to hear me and see me and my platform talk about empowering Black and melanated creators in sports media, follow at Black Rosie Media. And you can always follow at Locked On Kraken on Twitter. And keep up with the goings on there. Of course, we will be tuned in for the ECHL playoffs, for the AHL playoffs, and a time or two in the NHL playoffs, and postseason awards and stuff like that. That's what we've got. Stay hydrated. I know I have not been drinking enough water. Please stay hydrated, especially as it starts getting a little warmer, even though it's a hockey podcast. Stay hydrated. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to one another. Hold fast. Stay true. Get fired up and go Mavericks. I will catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.